Now, you might have noticed there was a big culture war over the last 10 years, and this culture war kind of stemmed from a Twitter storm that happened back in 2014. And today, we're going to talk about how a Twitter storm from 10 years ago might affect your reselling business over the next 10 years. So the Twitter storm that I'm referring to is Gamergate. Now, if you remember Gamergate from back in 2014, kind of all stemmed from there was a girl called Zoe Quinn. She was making a video game, and it turned out that she had kind of a favourable relationship with a games journalist who made a positive review of her game, despite the fact that it apparently wasn't very good. And that kind of sparked really it sparked 10 years of intellectual dishonesty within the journalism community. And it also sprung the massive culture war between DEI and diversity in games, and all this sort of stuff. There should be more women in games, more of everybody in games. And this culture war has actually changed society over the last 10 years, and possibly for the future as well. We're going to talk about how the impact that it's made and how it ties into reselling as well, especially if you're into the collectibles market. Now, I think one of the biggest indicators for the culture war has actually been Disney, believe it or not. And they purchased Marvel, they bought Star Wars, and obviously they've got all of their Disney cartoons and all of the Disney stories that they've got. And we've seen a huge decline in both Marvel and Star Wars over the last 10 years. For Marvel specifically, since Endgame, they haven't really revived any excitement into the franchise. The MCU is basically dead, and they've attempted to essentially create a franchise based on C-list superheroes that no one really cares about, right? Everybody just wants to see the Avengers. They want to see Spider-Man and the X-Men and all that sort of stuff, right? That is what they want to see. For Star Wars as well, the last 3 movies or however many they brought out, I'm not really into Star Wars, but Star Wars itself has seen a huge decline as well. People didn't really like Rey. I don't think they liked Finn either. And as a result, that's caused a massive drop-off on purchases for merchandising, t-shirts, toys, bed duvets, you name it. All of that merchandising stuff takes a hit. And ultimately, as a result, because of the issues that they've had with Marvel, with Star Wars, and also a lot of their Disney films as well, Snow White has had a huge backlash as well because of the use of dwarves and all that sort of stuff, and the Little Mermaid had a huge backlash as well. And I think the biggest indicator of whether it's been accepted by the market or not is when you look at their stock price, and Disney's stock price has not been doing well over the last 5 years. It's been going down and down and down. They're not getting subscribers for their Disney Plus subscription service, which is a big indicator as well, that people just aren't signing up for this. They'd rather sign up for Netflix or Amazon Prime, or whatever other one they want to use. So these are very big indicators when we look at the future of franchises, of IPs and that sort of stuff. We look at stock market price, and we look at things like subscriptions and that sort of stuff, where they are in the market. Now, if we look at the video game market's going through this a very, very similar decline. And if you think of games are generally made over a 5-year period, right? So over the last 10 years, you had the games that were being made at the beginning of Gamergate, and they had a focus and that sort of stuff, and then they came out 5 years after that, roughly. And then after that, right in the middle of the culture war, you've got a bunch of developers that are trying to instill their worldviews into games, into franchises that already exist, and those take 5 years to come out. Now, over the last 5 years, I can't think of a single game that really has been memorable that's come out of the Western world. We've had billion-dollar franchises collapse, multi-million-dollar studios close. Sony, for example, they made Concord, and that was supposed to have cost anywhere between $500 million and $800 million or pound. I think it was dollars. I mean, that's an insane amount of money, guys. That game closed after 1 week. And it's very, very clear why that game closed down. The characters were boring. No one is going to dress up as these characters at cosplay, or that's why That's why Overwatch was so popular, because the characters in it were memorable. People liked them. They wanted to see, you know, they were attractive. You know, the girls in there were attractive. They had big boobs and that sort of stuff. And whether you like it or not, that is what people want to see in video games. Now, Concord was supposed to be Sony's flagship product of the next 5 years. They were hanging the PS5 Pro on it. That's why the PS5 Pro trailer, when it came out, wasn't very good, because they had to cut all of the Concord stuff from it. There was also supposed to be a Concord TV show coming out, which got canned as well. And I think, you know, they made less than $1 million off of that game, guys, and that is ultimately why it closed. You know, we've also seen reboots of TV shows like Powerpuff Girls, you know, get announced and cancelled and re-announced and cancelled again, because they just can't get it right, because the writing in it's terrible. You've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know, a classic 80s, 90s cartoon, guys, about fighting turtles. And we've had one reboot from Seth Rogen and one reboot from Mindy, I can't remember her name, Mindy, you know, the girl from The Office, right? Both failed. I mean, how do you fail to reboot Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, guys? I just, you know, I can't believe it. But on the flip side, we've had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video game come out. It's like an arcadey sort of a, you know, 16-bit game like you'd play in the arcades. People loved it because it was true to its original lore, its original fan base, and that is ultimately what people want. And it seems that Western media doesn't want to admit that the last 10 years of culture war has caused irreversible damage to to Western franchises, to Western IPs, to the Western economy of just nerd culture in itself. And another thing that it definitely doesn't want to admit is the Eastern media is seeping into the cracks that the Western media has left. And, you know, I'm talking about game studios from Japan, from China, from Korea, and all over Asia, honestly. But those are the three main countries that I'd sort of refer to. And you know, from these Eastern studios, we've seen games like Elden Ring, you know, Monster Hunter, Marvel Rivals. We've seen Power World, Black Myth Wukong. All of these massive games that have reached into the Western zeitgeist that people are really excited for. They've put hundreds of hours into, and when you look at the top 10 games of last year, most of them are from China, Japan, Korea, and, you know, that part of the world. And it shows that Eastern media is starting to seep into Western culture more than what people are starting to realise. Now, if you also look at you know, TV shows as well, you've got the rise of anime, and anime at the moment is absolutely massive, and, you know, not even just outside of, not even just inside Pokemon, but outside of Pokemon as well. One Piece has been around for 30 years, and most of you probably will never have heard of it if you're not in the collectible space or you've never watched anime in your life. But One Piece has been around for 30 years. In the last 5 years, we've seen Netflix announce that they're going to create a live-action series of it. They're also going to remake the original anime from the beginning all the way to the end. There's like I think there's like 1,200 episodes of One Piece. It's not even finished yet. You've got the BBC is starting to take on the original anime series as well. So it does seem that there's a lot of money currently being pushed into One Piece alone specifically. And, you know, you've got the rise of the One Piece card game as well, which is absolutely massive. I think it's the number 2 card game at the moment, and their tournaments are actually some of the biggest tournaments in the world across all TCGs. So it shows that One Piece on its own is becoming a massive powerhouse, and obviously that is a Japanese IP. In addition to that, though, you've had Netflix create a lot of their own IPs, a lot of their own animes. We've had Castlevania, we've had Devil May Cry, both Japanese IPs again. But they're pumping money into anime. They're taking a lot of licenses. They've had One Punch Man, they've had Death Note. A lot of really popular animes and franchises are being put onto Netflix, and a lot of people are watching them. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep making them, wouldn't keep putting them on there. And when you actually look at all of the new stuff that is going on to Netflix, there is a lot of anime going on there in comparison to any other genre that I can actually see anyway. So it's interesting to see how Eastern media, whether it be TV, film, video games, are heavily seeping into Western life and the Western zeitgeist. And the Western media doesn't seem to want to admit it. And I think that's one of the reasons why Astrobot won Game of the Year last year and not Black Myth Wukong. And it kind of seems to me that people are starting to seek out meaningful stories again. Meaningful characters with real plights and personalities, and they're not just pawns to kind of serve the writer's worldview. These blank-faced pawns that kind of just stand there. And I think people are seeking this out now, and that is why they are going towards more Eastern, sort of storylines and that sort of stuff. They're darker, they're more gritty. They remind you of what TV and film used to be like. I mean, if you try and think of maybe the last 5 years or so, or maybe even since Game of Thrones ended, there hasn't been anything on TV everybody's talking about. You think of Game of Thrones, you think of Lost, you think of Dexter, you think of Breaking Bad, for example, The Wire, The Sopranos. Every kind of period has had an era of the great TV show, and we seem to be lost in that. We don't have that at the moment. There isn't anything that everybody universally agrees this is the thing that everybody should be watching, right? And maybe that is an issue with marketing, but I personally think there's just a lack of decent storytelling and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I think back to films that we used to, I still remember now. We think about The Matrix, The Lord of the Rings. We can go back even further. Die Hard, Aliens, Terminator. All of these great movies that are still talked about and watched and loved 20, 30, 40 years on from now. And for me, I can't even think of a film from the last 5 years that has been that impactful or influential that will even be remembered in 5 years, let alone discussed. And I think that, the reason for that is because all of those movies that I just mentioned, they stayed true to their lore, to their fan base, to themselves, the characters inside. I mean, Matrix 4 came out and surprised people didn't like it because it's made in the modern era. We don't really have decent writers anymore. Everybody wants to try and put their own worldview into things and politicize everything, whereas people just want to watch a decent dark fantasy, Lord of the Rings. They don't want to have to deal with politics and all that sort of stuff on whatever fence. They just want to watch Lord of the Rings. They just want to watch Aragorn stick a sword through an orc. That is all they want to see. And the last 5 to 10 years of media creation seems to have left that at the wayside and completely forgotten why they create media in the first place. But if you can think of an influential movie from the last 5 years, put it down in the comments, let me know, because I honestly can't think of one. But how do we tie this into reselling? Well, this is going to affect our business over the next 10 years, especially if you're in the collectible space. If you're still picking up things like, Spider-Mans and, the Avengers, Star Wars toys and all that sort of stuff, I mean, it's fine I'd still be picking up that stuff as well, but I think the thing that we need to be thinking about is how the culture war of the last 10 years is going to affect the collectible space over the next 10 years. Because these things happen in such large jumps that you don't even realise that they're happening. So, over the next 10 years, what sorts of toys, games, video games, media, those sorts of things are people going to be nostalgically looking back at? And I think over the last 10 years, there's been a massive shift in what people will even consider to be looking back at. And, for something to be popular, for something to be popular in 20 years' time, it has to be something that you enjoyed 20 years ago when you were maybe a kid or a young adult or something like that, right? If you were into Pokemon in the 90s, there's a good chance that you might actually be into Pokemon again at this moment because it's very, very popular at the moment. If you was into Marvel 20 years ago when you was a kid, that's probably why you was really, really interested in, the MCU, because it was great characters, all the characters that you played with as toys as a kid. You watched the cartoons, you played the video games and all that sort of stuff, and now they're in a big cinematic universe and it's just everything you could have ever dreamed of, right? But in order for that to kind of to that in itself is what sells merchandise, what sells t-shirts, what toys, toys, figures, and all that sort of stuff as well. And I think that over the last couple of years or so, we've seen a decline in people buying merchandise for Star Wars, Spider-Man, and all that sort of stuff. You might have noticed recently that Hasbro announced that they were no longer actually going to make toys themselves. They were actually just going to be an IP powerhouse, and they were basically just going to send out their IPs to whoever wants to make toys for it, basically. So we need to think about that as well. Back in the day, the reason why the Star Wars Kenner series was so massively popular is because it was the only toy brand that had that license. And there was a big nobody actually wanted the Star Wars license back then. That's how Kenner ended up getting it, which is kind of crazy, right? And then Hasbro bought Kenner in the end. But now, if Hasbro are going to be sending out their IPs to any licensing company, it means that there's no gold standard for what the collectible is. What is the best collectible for that scene, and you end up just having a big, kind of AliExpress style, soup of crap Star Wars products. I would imagine there'll probably be some high end ones there as well, but it's definitely something to think about over the next 10 years. Do we think that Spider-Man's going to be popular in 10, 20 years' time? Or is it going to be stuff like Naruto, Luffy from One Piece, Pokémon again? Is there going to be a massive rise in Japanese culture? And is that going to push aside, Western culture and the Western IPs that we've built over the last 20, 30 years, right? And yeah, I mean, I think about like dinky toys, for example, like dinky cars. I was offered some dinky cars, I think last year or it might be the year before, and they had loads of them, and I was just like, they was like, I'm not ready to get rid of them yet, but do you want them when I do? And I was like, look, I don't know, just let me know and we'll talk about it, because it depends how long in the future you want to get rid of them. I don't see much of a longevity in dinky cars, because the people that I see buying dinky cars are kind of in their 60s, their 70s, and maybe even in their 80s, and we have to face the reality that over the next 10, 20 years, the market or the pool of those people that are buying dinky cars will start to shrink. And as a result, those collections will start to go onto the market. There'll be an inflation of the amount of product available out there. And ultimately, the pool of people will be getting smaller that want to buy it. And that will create a downward pressure on the price of them. So we look at things like that and we can apply those to the future. And, how will that affect collectibles going forward as well? Should we still be hanging on to our 1970s, 1980s Kenner stuff, thinking that it's going to go up in price, when actually it might be that there's going to be a decline in Star Wars because there hasn't been a revival for Star Wars in the last trilogy. Even some of the spin-offs have been really, really poorly received, and I won't go into any more than that. But yeah, hopefully you understand kind of what I'm talking about here. Hopefully you found it interesting and a nice little journey through the last 10 years of culture and how that has affected franchises and IPs in the West. And let me know in the comments though what you think. Do you think this has had a massive impact? And I don't think it matters what side of the fence you are on whether you agree with all of the DEI stuff or whether you're on the fence that you don't. It doesn't matter. All it matters is, do you think it's affected the reselling space, the collectible space, and what the future actually holds over the next 10 years? Can companies like Disney and Ubisoft bring it back? Ubisoft, I think, have lost. They're at their lowest stock price since 2010. So the last 15 years of their stock price, guys, of their stock gains, have just been wiped off the map. And 15 years is a long time. Will it take 15 years for Ubisoft to try and claw it back? Will it take 15 years for Disney to try and claw it back? We've seen a lot of layoffs in the industry over the last year or two, and a lot of these studios that were putting out this absolute garbage have been closed down, and it's possible that we're starting to see the end of this now. I think the Trump presidency has been a massive catalyst as well. Elon Musk, buying Twitter and kind of changing the space there, and it seems that there may be another culture shift happening right now as we are talking. again, whether you agree with Trump or whether you agree with Musk, it doesn't matter. What we're talking about is how the culture is shifting, and will we start to get more important Western media start to come through over the next 5-10 years? Something else to be something else to be keeping an eye out on, I guess. But I just kind of wanted today to kind of highlight that the culture war and the impact that it has actually had on, or it will have on reselling over the next 10 years, starting from now. So up to 2035, even beyond, maybe 2045 as well, if we're all still alive by then. So yeah, let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. Leave us a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new here. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think there's been a culture war? Do you think it's affected the cultural space at all? Has it allowed for Japanese and Chinese and Korean IPs, franchises and media to seep into those cracks that Western media has left behind? Or would it have happened anyway? It's hard to know, but I'd like to know what your thoughts on it. Leave us a like, subscribe if you're new here, check out the site, don't be tight. See you on the next one.